Hello everyone and welcome back to the fifth reading session of Deep Learning. I am Urmisha. In today's session, I have tried to keep today's session very simple and interactive. So today we'll be discussing about convolutional neural network. This is one step ahead of what we have done in last two sessions. In session 2 and 3, Abhidita covered about multi-layer perceptron. That was the most simplest neural network architecture. And then in last session, I covered about some customizations of neural network. Mostly it was related to Python implementation. And today we'll be looking at a new network structure, that is the convolutional neural network. So a list of things that I plan to cover today. So is my sound properly audible?
To
Hello.
me, it is audible. I mean, maybe a little. Yeah, I think it is audible. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm using headphones and sometimes the speaker goes away from my hand. All right. So what I plan to cover today is about what were the problems that we can face while analyzing image data by multi-layer perceptrons. In last sessions, we have been doing classification of image data using MLP, and there are some issues with it. Second, I'll cover how convolutional neural network differs from multi-layer perceptrons. Second, some technicalities related to the architecture of CNN. It involves operations like cross-correlation convolution. Then how are the hidden layers inside a CNN, followed by how CNNs can be used for RGB images. First, we will see it for grayscale images, that is two-dimensional images, and then for RGB images. A few more technicalities like padding, stride, pooling, and lastly, we will look at LeanIt. LeanIt is actually it is actually a complete CNN architecture, and probably the first one. It's quite popular and even used today in several model technologies. So we will see how this CNN architecture looks like and how it learns a dataset, Cipher 10 dataset. We have used this dataset in last session as well. So we will see how LeanIt learns image data such as some training images we will see from the Cipher 10 dataset. Okay. So we saw in our last session that when we were classifying in image data, like we were given images of a number of items like aeroplane, truck, animals, and we were asked to classify those images. We did it on such a data set. There we have to vectorize the entire input image into a one-dimensional vector, and then we were using it on the neural network architecture. So if we are given a k by k pixel image, we first have to vectorize it into a k square by 1 input. There are actually two problems of doing this while implementing multi-layer perceptron. First problem is that it will require large number of parameters, because the higher the resolution, more number of parameters will be required. Like in the last session, the images that we were using, those were 32 by 32 pixel images, and so for if there was only one node in the first hidden layer, say, and that will require uh, it will be vectorized into 784 size a vector, so it will require 784 many weights plus one bias, so total 785 parameters just for one hidden representation. And of course there will be more than one nodes in a particular hidden layer representation, so too many parameters. And 32 by 32 pixel image is honestly not very high resolution. Modern images can be, it can be 100 by 100 pixels, so it will require way more uh, parameters if we want to run especially a very deeper multi-layer perceptron network. And the other problem is that whenever we are vectorizing these images, the spatial information between the neighboring pixels, they are lost, because in image data, especially in high resolution data, the neighboring pixels, they have similar values, they behave similarly. So whenever we were factorizing it, that spatial association was entirely lost. These were two major problems of using multi-layer perceptron. for image data. And this is where the convolutional neural network comes into picture. So, convolutional neural network takes into consideration two things. First is it requires very few parameters for hidden layer representations. Secondly, is also takes into consideration the spatial structure of the images. And another advantage of using CNN is it can be parallelized across GPUs during forward propagation. Now, this part, unfortunately, I won't be able to cover this parallel computation part at least in today's session because of computational limitations in my personal desktop. I shall see if I can make any arrangements for that in previous sessions. So for now, I'm not. I won't be discussing about parallel computations of CNNs, and rather focus on the other 2 points that it requires very few parameters and how it takes into consideration the spatial structure. So to understand how CNN operates, we need to see how it differs from multilayer perceptrons. So in multilayer perceptrons, suppose if we have a m by m pixel image, say x m by m, which I have denoted it like an m by m matrix, and h be its hidden representation. So suppose there are m nodes. I'm saying m nodes, it can be some other value as well. Better to have some other value m star. So if hidden layer has this many nodes, then at each node we have to consider weighted combination of all the values in the pixel image. So it is first vectorized into m square by 1 vector. So it is a linear combination of all those values in each pixel plus a bias term. This was the MLP representation for one hidden node. Say for the kth hidden node, you have one bias bk, and then there will be m squared many weights wkij. However, when it comes to CNN, here the input of m by m image, it directly goes into the operation, and the hidden representation is also a two-dimensional array. Say some m1 by n1 representation. Then at each image, what it does is it considers a smaller section of the original image, the two-dimensional original image. For timing, I'm not taking into consideration uh, RGB images. Suppose our images are grayscale, that is two-dimensional images. Then what it does is it has a set of weights. It assigns those weights to the elements belonging to a smaller section of the image, then takes a summation plus a bias term. It is similar to what it was doing in multilayer perceptron, except that now we are considering smaller regions inside. And the weights, the region is changing with hidden representation Hij, but the weights they remain same. And this A and B, since we consider a very smaller region within the image, so this A and B they ranges up to some delta, say some minus delta to plus delta. If it is from minus delta to plus delta, then there will be elements on the left side of this ij. So if it is from some 0 to delta, then ij, a smaller section starting from this ij element to I plus delta, j plus delta element. So this is the broader picture of CNN. You can already see that how the weight has greatly reduced. To visualize this with an image, this is how we can write the convolutional neural network operation. This is called the cross correlation operation. So we have a input tensor. Here I am denoting a three. I have denoted it by a 3 by 3 matrix, and then we have a weight matrix that considers a local region within the matrix. This is called the kernel tensor. So this kernel tensor is actually sliding across this matrix. You can see in the bottom figure that it slides across the matrix at each window. It considers, say if this is a 2 by 2 kernel, so it considers a 2 by 2 area of the matrix, then it is multiplied with each element of that matrix and then added. Here I have considered the bias term to be 0, not adding any bias at each operation. So this window is sliding and considers the smaller region, adds them up and gives a shorter representation. So this is how the cross correlation operation performs. With me so far?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. So this is the cross correlation operation. So before moving on into seeing how what exactly this cross correlation operation is doing, there are 2 points that is worth mentioning. First is that whenever we are doing a cross correlation operation, so see the output tensor that is coming out, that has a smaller size than the input tensor. This is one typical thing. So this has one advantage, of course, when we have very high pixel images, we'll of course want an output tensor with a more lower resolution. So in general, if our image has a size of say nh by nw, and our kernel, or that is the window of averaging, that has size of kh by kw, then the output tensor or output array. I'm using the word tensor because I was doing Python coding using the TensorFlow library, and in TensorFlow library, the arrays are all addressed by tensors. And also, tensor word is very widely used in deep learning as in place of array. So the output tensor will be of size nh minus kh plus 1 and nh minus kw plus 1. Nw minus kw plus 1. So it will reduce. So the larger size of kernel you use, that means you are considering a wider region within the image for averaging, the smaller will be your output size. And so you can think of this as, since you're considering a smaller portion of the image every time for each of these output element, these are actually a smaller, belongs to a smaller region of the image. So you can think of each element as hidden representation corresponding to a smaller area of the image. Here is a small representation with an actual image. So the image above is actually a truck. I have taken this image from the Cypher 10 dataset. So this is a RGB image. Now, so far I have discussed about cross correlation operation for two-dimensional array. So from this RGB image, I have only considered the green channel of the image, that is the second channel, and and then considered a cross correlation with by a 4 by 4 tensor. The values that you see inside the kernel is arbitrary weights. This is just an example to show. So once you do the cross correlation operation, this image on the right side, it was the resultant image. Of course, this output size is a little smaller. So this is for you to try. If I tell you that this green channel of input image, this is of size 32 by 32 pixel. If I tell you that, and you can see that the kernel tensor, this is of size 4 by 4. So can you tell me what is the size of this output image?
Can you repeat the size of the input image?
This input image is 32 by 32.
So it's 24 by 24. Um, because it's nh minus h minus 1, I think.
NH minus KH, kernel size.
Yeah, yeah, like nh minus kh. Kernel size is 4 cross 4, right?
Yeah, 4 cross 4.
Okay. Then 27.
Plus 1.
This one, okay.
Minus H plus 1. So it's 29.
Yeah.
So, so this is actually a 29 by 29 pixel image. Now, if we have done the same thing with the multi-layer perceptron, that means 29 by 29 pixel. So, so for one hidden representation, we would have required 785 uh, parameters. So suppose if we wanted to have a 29 dimensional hidden layer representation, then we would have required 22,765 parameters. So if we want exact a 29 by 29 sized hidden representation in MLP, we have to multiply this 22,765 with another 29. Large number of parameters you require for one hidden representation. So there's one more thing. Now, if you look at these two images, like the original image and the output image, you can see that the image on the output side, it looks like a smoother version of this original green channel image. And this is where you will be able to link this cross correlation operation with convolution, because convolution is essentially the same thing. So to recall, convolution between two functions, say f and g, where f is some signal and g is a smooth signal, then the convolution operation between two functions f and g is actually the overlapping of f with the smooth signal, where the smooth signal is flipped. This is just to define in words. You can see the integral for convolution. So what convolution essentially does is, if you are given a smooth signal and f is some signal, the convolution, that is f star g, it provides a smoother version of f, or in other words you can say it denoises the original signal. Now these are actually functions I have defined on uh, real numbers. Now you can think of images as discrete functions as well. These are defined on spatial pixel locations. So if we think of fg as images as some function of pixel locations, then you can similarly write the integral in terms of summation as the convolution operation. Here it is. So if we recall again from the cross correlation operation, or what is our purpose, we want to find a smooth version of the image, of an input image. So our input image is like the signal, and the kernel that we consider, it is the kernel is the smooth signal we can think of. So the cross correlation operation we write similarly, considering that f is x, the input image, and g is w, or the kernel weights, then it looks that it looks like that they are almost similar, except there is a difference between the flipping of this smooth signal. In convolution it flips one way, and in cross correlation it flips the other. So there is slight difference between these two, but they the main purpose of both these operations are same. So but in convolution it is originally the cross correlation operation that is done, not the convolution operation. However, it is termed as convolution for simplicity. Before moving on into how these cross correlation operations, or what these cross correlation operations are doing, is there any question? All right. So there are actually the kernels that we are using. These kernels, as I just pointed out, what it was doing is it was finding out some smoother version of the images. Now smoothness can be, so you can read of smoothness as some signals within the images, and you can interpret these signals in the images as features. So different kernel brings out different features within the image. Take for example this image, like this is not an image, or you can think of this as an image. Say wherever there is a one, that's a white, and wherever there is zero in this matrix on the left, that's black. So you can think of a solid image, a solid object inside an image, and you want to find out where are the edges of this image, or where are the edges of this object. So in that case, you can use a kernel of this sort, 1 minus 1. So if you just slide it, you will be able to detect the edges on both sides. You can see wherever there is an image, it has, or there is an edge, it has one value, and in rest of the places it's a zero. So this particular kernel has the capacity of detecting vertical edges, not horizontal edges. It won't be able to detect that. So you can see, so this particular kernel has a particular purpose during cross correlation operation. Similarly, some other kernels has the ability to detect different other features. Say for this one, now suppose I have this matrix flipped, so I have the object now flipped inside the image. Now can you tell me what should be the kernel to detect the edge of this object inside the image? Or just try, what do you think should be the kernel now? Okay, let me go back to the last vertical edge detection. Probably it's not very clear how this kernel was able to detect the edges. So you see this 1 minus 1 kernel, it is sliding in this fashion, and then again it's sliding from the second row in this way. So whenever, see, for the first element it's 1 1 and 1 minus 1, so it's 0. For the second element it's 1 0. So whenever we are multiplying 1 minus 1, it was detecting a 1. Similarly, again, when it was at this second to last element, 0 and 1, there's a difference between these two elements. That point it was detecting a minus 1. So whenever the elements, consecutive elements are same, that means there is no edge. So this kernel, when it was multiplied with this kernel, it will give you a value 0. Whenever there is a difference in digit, this kernel will give you a different value than 0. So this is how it was detecting. So this is how these zeros and minus 1 and 1s are coming in this image, in this output image. Now can you say what will happen if your edges are in this fashion?
Transpose the kernel in last slide.
Sorry?
1 minus 1 in vertical fashion.
1 minus 1?
In a vertical fashion.
Yes, right. So it's just the transpose of whatever the kernel we saw in the last slide. That's the answer for this one. Oh. Now if there is a difference vertically, it will be able to detect those edges. That's right. So you can see that there are different kernels. With these two examples, you can see that there are different kernels that has a different purpose of detecting different features from a particular image, and that's why the output that we get after doing a cross correlation operation, it is called a feature map. It is considered that whenever we are doing a cross correlation operation of an image with a kernel, it gives right, it captures some features. So these hidden representations, they are actually, so each of these hidden representations, they are actually some features of the images. So at this point, now we have defined the cross correlation operation. Just to be on the safe side, I might address it as the convolution operation because of the name. So at this point, we are good to define a convolutional layer. So convolutional layer is nothing but cross correlation operation of the input image with a number of kernels. The cross correlation operation with each kernel gives rise to one hidden representation, that is one feature map. So whenever you are doing it with a number of kernels, it captures a number of feature maps, and that together constitutes a convolutional layer. So you can think of this as the first layer of our convolutional neural network. And of course, the difference is just in the cross correlation operation with the multi-layer perceptron. Rest of the things are pretty similar. Like there, you first do take a linear combination of the input vectors, and then you apply a sigmoid function, or sorry, not sigmoid, but an activation function on those hidden representations. Here also the technique is same. First you do a feature map representation, then each element of the feature map representation goes through an activation function. However, there now we can so far whatever we have defined, it was on two-dimensional array. Now we will look at what happens if we are looking at three-dimensional arrays. That means like RGB images. So the RGB images are mostly identified as multiple input channel images. So if it's RGB images, we have three channels. In general, there can be more than three channels, of course. So for whenever we have three-dimensional images, there our kernels are also three-dimensional. Basically, for each channel, we have cross correlation with one kernel. So here I have shown with three kernels. Then it's a cross correlation operation with three kernels that will give rise to three feature maps, and then we add them up. One might think that why are we adding it up? See, the thing is, irrespective of the color, the features remain same. That is the main ideology for adding all these. I mean, the output from each of the channels. That the features, even if we are using different kernels or if we use same kernels, we add them up from all the three channels because they essentially carry the same features. This was for multiple input channels. Now to generalize this, I have done with three channels. If there are, say, k many channels, I will require a three-dimensional tensor where the first dimension will correspond to the number of channels, that is k. There is another case that the output can also have multiple channels, and that's what we saw during convolutional layer, that we had a number of hidden layer representations. So a multiple output channel means you give one input inside the I mean the cross correlation operation, and then so far we got a two-dimensional array, but we might want a three-dimensional array. That means a number of two-dimensional arrays. In that case, we have to consider as many kernels. So if we want, say, c many output channels, we will use c many kernels. C many kernels will give rise to c many feature maps. So to generalize it, suppose now our input is three-dimensional, that is k by m by n. K denote number of input channels. So if it's grayscale, then it's 1. If it's RGB, it's 3. M by n pixel size. Then the kernel. So if I want, say, c many output channels, I'll use a four-dimensional kernel ck km by kn. C denotes number of output channels that I want, and then k is the number of input channels. Km by kn is the kernel size that I'm using. And the reason for using multiple output channel is, of course, a very high resolution images can have a number of features in it, and you, of course, you want to take note of each of the features. So in that case, you will prefer to use a number of different kernels. That's why multiple output channels are very much required whenever we are building a deeper network to capture a number of features in the image. A few more technicalities related to convolutions. One is that we have seen that whenever we are doing a cross correlation operation, our output size is reducing. Now it's good when we have a very high pixel image, say 100 by 100 image, but if we have small size images, say 32 by 32, then we cannot run a very deeper network if we want to capture many features. Suppose we want to capture many features, but we won't be able to run deeper network because the output size will decrease drastically. So what is done is, it is called padding. What padding does is it adds extra pixel along the boundary of the image so that your output size is same as the input size. Well, you might want to have larger size than your input size, then you do a padding of additional, even more additional layers. So here I have shown it that this was a 3 by 3 image, then I have done a padding on both sides of one layer, so that now it's a 5 by 5 image, and then you perform the cross correlation operation on this padded input image. So if you use a 2 by 2 size kernel on this padded input image, the output will be again 3 by 3. This is the main operation of padding. Now here I have shown it with one layer of padding. You can do more than one layer of padding. That will depend on the kernel size that you are using. And by default, these pixel values are always 0. But of course, if you need to customize for any particular applications, you can customize it in Python. So the idea is that mostly we never want the output size to exceed the input size. The main purpose of padding is to maintain the same input size. So if the input is say nh by nw size and you're using a kernel of kh by kw, then padding should be uh, kh minus 1 by 2. There is kh, there is a deficit of kh minus 1 size of size, so that's why you add a padding of half of it on top and bottom, and similarly on the left and right, kw minus 1 by 2. That's why there is a norm to use an odd sized kernel in during these convolutions, either 3, 5, 7, so that the padding is even on both sides. So these sort of things are very useful when we have very lower resolution images. There is another thing which is stride. So whenever we have on the, if we look at the opposite picture, that we have very high resolution images, in that case, of course, we will prefer to reduce the output size as drastically as possible. And to do that, we can use large kernels. But using large kernels may not be beneficial if there are very localized features. You won't be able to capture them with very large kernels. So now the problem is you have large size image, you want to reduce it to a smaller size image, but you can't by using large kernels. So the alternative is to use stride. What stride does is it allows the kernel to slide more than one element, skipping the intermediate location. That means so far the kernel was sliding smoothly. So if suppose here in this case, it is a one by one kernel I have used. So it was sliding from, it was supposed to slide from the first element 1 to 2, then 3, then 4 in this way. But if I when the stride is 1, but if I say that it can jump more than one element, say stride is 2, it will slide skipping one element in between. So from 1 it jumps to 3, then below it jumps to 11, 9, like this. So in this way, you can see that you're using a very small size kernel. Here I am showing it with one by one kernel, maybe say 2 by 2 kernel for a very large image. So if we use a very small size kernel, but the output size is greatly reduced because of using stride. So stride is very beneficial for very high resolution images. The rule of thumb is if we have nh by nw input image, kernel is kh by kw, and we use a stride of sh by sw. Here the stride is 2 by 2. Sh is 2, sw is also 2. I am skipping two elements horizontally and vertically as well. So the output size will be nh minus kh plus sh by h for height and similarly for width. Uh, any question or anything so far? Or shall I proceed?
Yeah, so here, like, thanks for the padding and striding information. Before that, I would just associate padding with agriculture, but it's intuitive. My question is regarding today, like as in the recent times, what is the most sophisticated real world example that you can think of which uses these mathematically fundamental techniques of padding and striding?
One thing I can think of is, say, suppose I am talking in terms of image data. Then suppose you have a very high resolution image data and you just want to find out the outline of some objects, say, yeah, say handwritten image detection. So obviously you will be interested in the edge of the written image in the grayscale image. So in that case, so if it's a very high resolution image, there is no point of sliding a very small kernel throughout the entire image, because that will be a very computationally expensive as well. In that case, you will prefer of shifting by one by one. I'm talking about stride. You will prefer doing that. It will reduce the computation time as well during edge detection. This is one example I can think of right now for stride. And as for padding, padding right now I cannot think of any immediate example besides that if it's a very small image, it will be beneficial. Like suppose it's a very small image, but there are a number of features within the image. Like it's a very crowded image. You want to identify some object in the image, but it's a very crowded thing. There are a number of objects inside the image. So of course you will prefer a very deeper network to learn that image. But if the size reduces largely by during cross correlation of kernels, you won't be able to build a very deeper network. So you prefer padding to keep the output size same, and you can learn the a number of features from that image. Well, that's what I can think of immediately, but it's a good question.
Yeah, thanks for it. And one more thing,
Mhm.
uh, just to ensure that I've got the intuitive understanding correct. So essentially, while training the network itself, it would be like the kernel is instantiated with or initialized with random values, and then the training happens, or is it something else?
Right, right. That's right. See, the weights are same as the MLP. So whatever these values that I'm using inside the kernels, these are some arbitrary weights I'm using. These are actually the things that is learned in this network through backpropagation.
Thanks.
Yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
Is striding equivalent to an address convolution or dilated convolution? Are these synonyms?
Oh, see, this is a reading session. I haven't read that part to answer this question. It seems like you know more than me regarding convolutions.
It is fine.
I'm not very familiar. Like, can you explain?
What you explained as striding is like what I understand of dilated convolution, or which are
Mhm.
also known as address convolution, is it seems to be similar to what you explained as striding. That's why I asked.
Oh, okay. So it is like you flip the smooth signal, but with an additional step, I plus some k plus a, like that.
Yeah, that's what I understand. I just wanted confirmation, clarity.
Oh, if you think the stride in terms of convolutions, then yes. Here, so here if we think of stride, then it is some g minus x minus some constant, say the stride value, say 2. Stride is 2, then minus 2, like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So there is one more operation, that is pooling. Now, pooling is actually an aggregation of the feature maps, and it further reduces the uh, tensor size, whatever it is, maybe it's a hidden layer representation or the exact image. It reduces the size by aggregation, but it doesn't require any additional parameters to do that. So the aggregation can be, there are three types of pooling: max pooling, minimum pooling, and average pooling. In this case also there is a sliding window, and you consider a smaller region of the matrix or the two-dimensional array, and then you average it, aggregate the information within that smaller region to constitute a smaller output image. So here I have shown by a 4 by 4 pixel image. and I'm using a 2 by 2 pooling. That means every time I'm considering a 2 by 2 window, finding the maximum value of that as the first element here in the output image. Then I again move that 2 by 2 window to 2, 3, 6, 7. 7 is the value in this way. So here you don't have to use any parameters or anything to aggregate the information within the image. You're aggregating everything and reducing your current input image size. This is useful when we have very larger output images, even after say one layer of cross correlation operations. Two things to note here during pooling. One is we can do pooling with padding. That means first we add some layer of uh, values, zero values around, and then we can do the pooling similarly. Or we can do pooling with strike. That means we consider the window skipping one element at each time. That will be uh, that is what is essentially done. And besides that, if we have say multiple input channel images, that means three-dimensional images, there we have to do pooling separately for each of the channels. So in case of pooling, you cannot increase your channel size. Whatever is your input channel size, you will get the same output channel size here. But the next two dimension, that is the image size of each channels, that gets greatly reduced. So the reduction in pooling, in the case of pooling, is very similar to what you have done in cross correlation. If you consider say a kp size of pooling, then again your output will have say nh minus kp plus 1 size after using pooling. So this so far summarizes the technicalities of convolutional layers. I have talked about how we are using cross correlation operations in the hidden layer representation. So here, whatever I have shown the examples, they were with the arbitrary weights, because see, you never know while training any images what are the features you should be extracting for classification. So this is what you do while constructing an entire convolutional neural network. These you specify the size of the kernels and what should be the corresponding weights of the kernels. That is what is learned through your provided data set. These kernel weights are the ones that you learn by training, repeatedly training through your training data set using backpropagation, and all the same techniques like minimizing a particular loss function during backpropagation. The same method follows. So I'll show a very simple CNN architecture now. This is called the LeNet. It is one of the first CNN architecture made by Jan LeCun. And this LeNet architecture is so standard that even in today's some of ATMs award that they use the same LeNet 5 structure. So the one that you see here in this image is LeNet 5 structure because it has got 5 layers. There are two convolutional layers followed by 3 dense layers. These dense layers are the same as the multi-layer perceptrons. So let me say a few more things. So he was using this for 2 by 2 dimensional images, but of course you can generalize this for multiple input 3 dimensional images. So what he used was, in the first two convolutional layer, for the first convolutional layer he used 5 by 5 kernel with 6 output channels, and the second convolutional layer 5 by 5 kernel with 16 output channels, and each convolutional layer was followed by a pooling method, an average pooling. Then after these two convolutional layers, we have two-dimensional images, so 16 many two-dimensional images. Then these 16 many two-dimensional images, everything was vectorized into a single vector, which then was propagated through a fully connected layer, as you have done in multi-layer perceptrons. So this was the architecture that he used for this problem of handwritten digit recognition. Now you can see there are some values written like 28 by 28 image becomes a 6 by 28 by 28 feature map. Here you can see it. So let me tell you how it becomes a 6 by 28 by 28 image. Let me tell you a little bit in detail about the LeNet 5 architecture that Jan LeCun originally used. So in the first convolutional layer, he is using kernel size of 6 by 5 by 5. So he was using grayscale images. So the images were only 28 by 28 pixels. So the first one is corresponding to how many output channels I want. Second one is for the input channels. There is one input channel, so one, and then 5 by 5. Then he used a padding of size 2 on each side, followed by a sigmoid activation function. As I was saying, once you have the hidden representation, you apply this any kind of activation function similarly as multilayer perceptrons. So the input images were 28 by 28 size. That means after the first layer, the output tensor size will be 28 minus 5 plus padding of 4 because 2 on each side. That means on height you have 4 layers total. So plus 4 plus 1. Right. That will be okay. Just a minute. Yeah. So that is a 28 by 28 output tensor size image. So if we go back here, you can see a 28 by 28 image now converted to a 6 by 28 by 28 feature map. After that, it is followed by an average pooling. So what he used was 2 by 2 average pooling with stride of 2. So a stride of 2 means, so NH is now 28. This is our input image size. Kp is the size of pooling, which is 2, stride is 2. So NH minus Kp plus SH by SH, which is 40. So from now, as we perform the average pooling, our input from 28 by 28 reduces to 16 by 60. And here the input channel was 6. Pooling doesn't change the input channel, so it's 6 by 14 by 14, as you can see here. Now in the next, as we move to the second convolutional layer, there he again uses a 5 by 5 kernel, but now 16 output channels. Similarly, we have a sigmoid function, activation function after that. So now our input size is from the last pooling layer, which is 6 by 14 by 14. So NH is now 14, kernel size 5. No pooling has been, no padding has been used here. So NH minus KH plus 1 is 10. So output tensor size now becomes 16 by 10 by 10. Now he does another level of pooling, a 2 by 2 average pooling with stride 2. So now the input tensor size is, oh, there is a small mistake. It should be 16 by 10 by 10 here, the input tensor size from the last layer. So it should be 16 by 10 by 10. My mistake. So if we do the calculation, then it will again be 10 minus 2 plus 2 by 2, which is 5. The output tensor size is 5 after pooling from the second layer. So now this image is vectorized into one dimension. That means it will have a dimension of 16 times 5 times 5. That will be, I think, is 400. Yes, should be 400. So you have a 400 dimensional vector now. From here onwards, it performs the same function as multi-layer perceptrons. That means he has used 120 and 84 nodes. That means two layer of hidden layer representation, same as MLP with 120 and 84 nodes. And in the last layer, that is the output layer, there are 10 nodes because here also the image detection classification was sorry, the digit recognition classification was for 10 different digits, so the output size was 10. So in the last layer there are 10 nodes. This was the overall representation. Now to show you an example, I have replicated this same LeNet 5 architecture, keeping the padding, stride, these hyperparameters same. Actually, these hyperparameters, like what should be the padding size or pooling size, that you can decide by cross validation. But here I'm keeping it same as the LeNet 5, the original LeNet 5 architecture. With this, I have studied the Cipher 10 dataset. You have seen this dataset in last session. So there were in total 60,000 color images. That means multiple channel images. 3 by 32 by 32 was the size for each of the images. And the output was you have to classify them into one of the 10 classes. These were some images from the training dataset. So the kernel weights at each of these convolution, I considered the same architecture. So two convolutional layer, three dense layers. The kernel weights, they are learned in the process of backpropagation. So I've learned them. I've got the weights that fit the training dataset the best. So here is one example showing you how the images are broken into feature maps in the subsequent layers. This is with one image. This is the input image, a truck, and then after the first convolutional layer, this is how we have six images because we are using six output channel kernels in the first convolutional layer. So this is how the image has been read by different feature maps for the first convolutional layer. Then, after the first convolutional layer, an average pooling, the images has been aggregated. You can see from top to bottom, the images has been aggregated to some extent. Then there is another layer of convolution, which is from convolutional layer 1 with average pooling to convolutional layer 2. Because now from after average pooling in the second convolutional layer, 16 output channels has been used. So we have 16 feature maps. And then in the convolutional layer 2, another set of average pooling. It averages. Well, at this point, the images looks entirely distorted. So from there onwards, this image has been vectorized into one-dimensional vector, and then there are two more layers. Well, those are not really very interesting to visualize, so I've discarded them. Just showing you the output from two layers, how it will look like if we train or forward propagate one train image inside this convolutional neural network. It's a very short example to motivate. So that's all I plan to cover today. And in next session, I plan to discover few more type of CNNs, the ones that are used in recent times, and to do some more illustrations with Python. So that's it. Do you have any questions, anyone?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you for this one, like the other ones as well. Specifically, I like the questions about adding and striding. Mostly because of their names, I find them very cute. My question, it's kind of a curious question because this thing falls under the domain of AI by definition, I think. Even though we may be accustomed now to use AI with only complex models like ChatGPT, it borderline falls under AI, right?
Right.
Yeah, so the question is, now that there's a lot of push, specifically in regulated industries, where you must explain what your algorithm is doing in order to be able to use it. Uh, at least, say, for the kind of companies that, like somebody with, sorry, I mean, companies in the banking domain, one such company I myself work. So the push is to explain what your AI is doing. So, in the context of these algorithms, where I'll motivate with an example. Like there's this famous example where they built a detector, husky or dog, but it ended up being a snow detector. If there is snow in the background, it will classify husky or something, otherwise dog. So the question is, with these methods, when the network is being trained, are there any nuances about explainability also, where say the kernel that is fetched or something surrounding it that can be explained using some kind of algorithms?
the problem that you addressed, that snow is the one that became the key feature of detecting a husky. What I think essentially is that maybe some of the features, the feature maps, the kernels that is being studied, if I think of it through CNNs, then it must have been that some features were particular kernels were given more weightage compared to other kernels. So the issue that you mentioned, that can be resolved through the training, the images that through which you are training your CNNs or whatever architecture it is, that has a big role to play in it, like how you will resolve these issues. Besides that, whenever you are doing like in a very deeper network, you have lots of parameters that you are learning through kernels. So to identify like which particular kernel can cause such a problem, it's really not feasible. It is, if we are using one hidden layer, then you can identify such features like which kernel might have caused this issue, but the deeper the network is, it is not possible to hold a particular kernel accountable for this.
Yeah. I guess it must be a tough problem. At least one intuitive thing that comes to mind, and you can comment more on it, is you have whatever number of kernels that have been trained. They must have some sort of natural importance score associated with them. As in, not all kernels would influence the output equally. So if there can be a rank ordering, and say I take the top 4 5 kernels, whatever, and then I check the correlation of, I'm using correlation loosely, but in the training data set, what or what these top 5 kernels are usually associated with what kind of features in the image, or what all. And like, is the line of thought that I'm having going towards some manifestable direction, or is it not conducive in this case? Because it is motivated from, like, if you have a model which has 100 numeric features, you can rank order them according to importance and then look at the top 5 features, something like that.
No, it's a very interesting thought, and the moment you mentioned the question, I also was thinking in the same direction. Like, we are using activation functions at each representation, so we can actually check, right, to corresponding to which classes, which particular kernels or which particular values are getting more activation weights. So in that way, we maybe backtrace and identify which particular kernels are more uh, correlated with a particular class. I think, but then it will be a huge breakthrough. It's like you're explaining a black box model.
Thanks, that inspires me.
Of course.
Once again, thank you for the entire session. Looking forward to getting into more complexities regarding these algorithms. uh, these type of things, they keep my, what do I say, the cerebral corpus active, and let the corporate guys think that I know something more than the usual, but both win-win situations for me.
So if there is not anything else, stop sharing, and maybe then we can call it a day.